Hey, welcome back. In this video, we're going to learn how to make random numbers, how to use if statements and conditionals, as well as how to work with Boolean data types. So, let's start off with random numbers. Probably played video games before, and you know many video games have some sort of random element, and they do that by using random numbers. We're going to create a random number ourselves, as well as how we can do different things in order to shape that random number into the kind of form that we want. So, I'm going to create a new variable where it's going to hold on to my random number. I'm just going to call it random number, just like that. And to create a random number, we do math dot random, just like this. And that's it. That's going to create a random number for us. But this random number is going to be between 0 and 1. It's going to be a floating point number. Remember, floating point numbers are decimals. And it's going to be between 0 and 1. That's not always going to be something that we want. But let's see that this in fact does give us a random number. So we'll do console log. And we'll print out random number. Just like that. Let's clear the console. That's from the last video. Let's run it. And there we go. We got a random number. Let's run it again. See if it gives us a different random number. That's different. Run it again. Another random number. So, this gives us a random number between 0 and 1, which sometimes is all you need. But sometimes you want it to be a number, say, between 1 and 10. And sometimes we're going to want it to be a whole number. So let's learn how it is that we can shape this random number so it gives us a random number that we want. And for this, we're going to look at making a random number between 1 and 10. So I'm going to keep this the same. And to do this, I'm going to take my random number and add a little bit of code to it using math to shape it how I want. So I'm going to start off with taking my random number, I'm going to multiply it by 10. So if I start off with a random number between 0 and 1, and I multiply by 10, now I have a random number between 0 and 10. Next, I'm going to use math.ceil. Ceil stands for ceiling, which is a fancy way of rounding a number. So there are three ways to round a number. There is math.round, which rounds the way that we taught you in math. So if the last digit is a 5 or higher, it rounds up. If it's a 4 or less, it rounds down. There is math.ceil, and this will round a number up always. So even if the last digit is a 1, it's still going to go up. And there is math.floor, which always rounds down. So those are the three ways that we're going to round. I chose math.ceil because I want to round this number up, because if I get a number between 0 and 10, if I round it up, I now have a whole number that is between 1 and 10. If I did floor, then I'd get a random number between 0 and 9. And if I did round, then it would still be kind of a random number, but 0 and 10 would be less common than all the other possible numbers. So that is why I'm making that choice. So, did two things. I multiplied my random number by 10 to make a random number between 0 and 10, but it's still a decimal. And then I rounded that decimal number up, so I got a whole number. Let's run it again and see that I do in fact get a random number between 1 and 10. I got a 1, run it again. I got a 9, run it again. I got a 1 again. It's random, so that's possible. Run it again. Another 1. Highly unlikely, but still possible. A 5. So, bunch of random numbers. Let's clear the console again. But that is essentially how you would create random numbers in programming. We pretty much always start off with a random number between 0 and 1. Some programming languages like Python give you easier ways to create it, but most will just give you a number between 0 and 1. And then we use different math operations to shape that number into the range that we want. So that's random numbers in a nutshell. Next, let's take a look at Booleans. So Boolean is a type of variable that only has two possible values. It's either true or it's false. So I'm going to create a variable called my Boolean. Sometimes it's called a bool for short. And it can either be true, just like that, lowercase, or it can be false. That's the only possibilities. And we use these as conditions to decide if we want to run a piece of code or not. We can also create variables by using conditions. So for example, I could say my Boolean. Actually, let's start off with printing it out so we can actually see what it does. So console log my Boolean. If I just run this, we can see it's just going to print out false. But I can use a condition like my condition is 1 is less than 5. And a condition is either true or is false, a Boolean. In this case, 1 is in fact less than 5. That is a true statement. So this is going to be true, and I run it, and it's going to say true. If I put in 10 is less than 5, that is a false statement. That is not true. And so if I run this, it's going to say false. We can also do greater than. And we can check for equality. We can say, and to check for equality, we use 3 equal signs. So 1 equal sign when we're assigning information to a variable, 3 equal signs when we want to check are two things equal to each other. So we're asking, is 10 equal to 5? This is false. And there we go. But if I say, is 10 equal to 10? That is true. Okay? So that is how we can kind of think of conditions. There are many different other conditions that we can think of that are they true or are they false. We can compare strings to see if they're equal to each other. So I could say, is hello equal to hello? That is true. But if I say, is hello equal to goodbye? That's not how you spell goodbye. That is false, because they're not the same. So we compare numbers using kind of our math operations, but we can also compare strings and see if they're equal to each other as well. We can also check if things are not equal to each other. So not equal is done with an exclamation mark and an equal sign, like this. This means not equal. So this is saying, is hello not equal to goodbye? That is true. These are not equal to each other. So this would be true. And if I run it, it says true. Yes, those are in fact not equal to each other. So that is conditions in a nutshell and how we can use them to create Booleans. Why would we want to do this though? The reason why is because sometimes, or very often, we want the computer to run code only in certain circumstances. So for example, maybe we're playing a game where you win or you lose, and we want to say, congratulations, you won, but only if they won, and we say, oh, too bad, you lost, only when they lose. So we'd want to use a conditional in order to say, run this code if they won, otherwise run this code. Let's take a look at how that would work. So I'm going to keep my new variable. I'm just going to say it's true for now. And now I'm going to create a conditional that is going to run code depending on what the value of that is. And a conditional, the most common conditional, is the if statement. So it starts off with if, that's why we call it an if statement, followed by brackets, and then some sort of condition or Boolean. I'm going to start off with the variable, and we're going to see how we can use conditions in these afterwards. So if my Boolean, which is saying if this thing is true, then we do squiggly brackets, and in between these squiggly brackets, we write the code that we want to run if this is true. So we're going to say console log my Boolean is true. Just like that. Also notice that we have a indentation here. Usually it's going to be 2 spaces, but you can actually set it to other stuff. The other standard is sometimes 4 spaces, but I like to use 2. Also a tab usually is going to give you the same amount. But we do this in order to give a visual indication of what code is in between squiggly brackets like this. Right now we don't have a lot, so it's pretty obvious, but when we get into bigger stuff, we're going to start having a lot of squiggly brackets and if statements and whatnot. And having this indentation is going to allow us to quickly see what code is inside of our if statements. So let's run this, and we're going to see it print out my Boolean is true. We'll clear the console again and press run, and it says my Boolean is true. Now I'm going to change it to false. And this time, nothing is going to get printed out because this is only going to run if my Boolean is true. And it is not true, it is false. I run it again, nothing happened. We can make something happen though by adding on to our if statement. Because sometimes we have a bunch of different cases that we want to do, or we want to do something if it's true and something else if it's false. To do something else if it is false, we use the else command. So we're going to do else right there. Once again, we open up another bracket, and inside those brackets, we write the code that we want to run if this is not true. So I'm going to do console log and do my Boolean is false. Now when we run the code, it is going to do something because this was false, so it's not going to do this. But it will do this instead. And that's what the else means. If this is not true, do this instead. We'll run the code, and now it says my Boolean is false. If I change it back to true, we'll see it only prints out my Boolean is true. There we go. So this is how a conditional works. It checks to see if something is true or not. And we use that to decide what code should run and what code should not. I should put a semicolon there, but like I said in the first video, JavaScript is pretty forgiving, and it will put it there if you forget. Next, let's take a look at how we can do the same thing, but with conditions in the if statement, as well as how can we have more than just 2 possibilities to happen. So I am going to have a new variable called, say, my number. I'm going to set it to 10. And I'm going to make a conditional that's going to either say if my number is a positive number, a negative number, or 0. So now we got 3 cases. We start off with if, once again, open up the brackets, but now we don't have a variable that's true or false. Instead, what we're going to do is use a condition to say, if this condition is true, do this code. So I'm going to say, if my number is greater than 0, so if a number is greater than 0, it is a positive number, I'm going to console log my number is positive. Just like that. Now, I want to do a case where it's negative. And I can still add on to this conditional that I'm making by checking for another case. To do that, I do an else again, but rather than opening up brackets right away, I do another if, more brackets, and I put in the second condition. My number is less than 0. Any number less than 0 is a negative number. So, once again, I do squiggly brackets, and in this case, I write the code for what I should do if it's a negative number. Console.log my number is negative. Just like that. Now, The only other possibility, if it's not a negative number and it's not a positive number, that means that my number must be 0, because that's the only number that is not positive or negative. So I'm going to do an else, and once again, console log, my number is 0. And now I have 3 different cases all in my one conditional block. This is a conditional block when they all join together like this. And only one of these can ever happen. So if I run this, right now my number is 10. So I should see my number is positive. There we go. If I make it negative 10, my number is negative. And if I make it 0, my number is 0. Okay? So most often you're actually going to see if statements like this. The condition is going to be inside of the if statement rather than a variable on its own. But sometimes you do want to be able to use both cases. So that's why I showed you both. Another key thing about these is that sometimes you have conditions that are going to be true for multiple cases, but only one of them ever runs. And the one that runs is the first case that is true. So let's see an example of how that works. I'm going to say my first case is if it is greater than 10. My number is greater than 10. So I changed this and this. Next, I'm going to say if it is greater than 0, it is between 0 and 10. And else, actually I'm going to do an equal sign there. What that equal sign does is say if it is greater than or equal to 0. So now if it is 0, this code will run. And I will replace this with my number is negative, because that is the only other possibility. So if I put in 0, I should see this code because 0 is not greater than 10, right? Let's clear this. Run the program again. It says my number is between 0 and 10. That is true. 0 is between 0 and 10. If I do 10, I'm going to see the same thing. Still between 0 and 10 because 10 is not greater than 10. It is equal to 10, but it's not greater than it. But if I do 100, 100 is greater than 10, and it's also greater than or equal to 0. So both of these are true. But because this is a single if block, only one of these is going to happen. And it's going to be the first one, because that is the first one that is true. There we go. Just like that. I didn't realize I had a space there. And we can see if I do a negative number, like negative 100, it tells me that's negative. So that is how computer will decide what code to run when multiple conditions could be true. It will always do the first one that is true, and it will ignore all of the rest. Okay? The next thing we want to do is sometimes we want to combine conditions. And what I mean is we want to know if two things are true or if either of two things are true or something like that. And we call these Boolean operations. There are 3 that we need to know for this course. And, or not. And let's see how they work. I'm going to create 2 Boolean variables. I'm going to say var Boolean 1 is going to be true for now. Var Boolean 2 equals true as well. And these could be conditions. As long as it's something that is true or false, this is going to apply. And we'll even take a look at an example of that in a little bit. And then we're going to do a console log. And inside this, I'm going to write in a condition that does a Boolean operation. So the first one we're going to look at is AND. So we want this thing to be true only when both of these things are true. That's what AND means. So to do that, we do Boolean 1, 2 ampersands. Boolean 1, sorry. and boolean 2. So this is going to print out true because here both of them are true. Run program, true. But if only one of them is true and the other one is false, this is no longer true. And it's going to give me false, just like this. So that is what AND is true. It will give you a true or false, and it will only ever be true if both of these are true. I don't necessarily have to do variables. I could just do, say, 1 is less than 3 and 5 is less than 3. I can do it in conditions like that. Still works perfectly fine because both of these will give me booleans. And this is going to give me false because while this is true, this is not. Okay? But if I change it to, say, 2, that is now true because both of these statements are true. That's how AND works. Now let's do OR. I'm just going to undo until I get back to my two booleans. So once again, OR is done with two vertical pipes like that. This is going to be typically right above the enter sign key on your keyboard. So you have to do shift and then two of those. And that is an OR symbol. OR is a little bit different than AND in that it is true as long as one of them are true. So this is going to give me true because while boolean 2 is false, boolean 1 is true. So I'm going to clear this again, run the program, and we say, hey, this is true. If they're both true, that is also going to be true because only we need to have is one of them to be true. As long as one of them are true, then OR says this is a true statement. There we go. But when both of them are false, that is the only case where OR is false. So both of them are false, so we're saying, are either of these true? That is not true. They're both false, so it gives us false. So, AND gives us a true statement when both are true, or will give us a true statement when either of them are true. And only one of them needs to be true. They can both be true, but as long as one, then we get that is true. The last thing that we get is the not method or operation. And what that does is just a flip from true to false. So this is a Boolean operation that only operates on one Boolean. And all we do is an exclamation mark right before it. Kind of like how we did not equal. We had an exclamation mark, then an equal sign. That exclamation mark means not. So right now, Boolean 1 is false. So if I say not false is true. There we go. And not true, as you would guess, is false. So that's what not does. It just changes a true to a false. And that is all the Boolean operations that we need. There are others, but they can be made by combining these three in different clever ways. Just by using AND, OR, and NOT, we can create all sorts of complicated conditions. But that is a Boolean operation in a nutshell. Finally, now we've done all the basics, so you've seen everything that you need for your next assignment. But as usual, I'm going to show you some more advanced stuff because it can be a useful thing. And the advanced thing I'm going to show you for this one is called the ternary operator. A ternary operator is another kind of conditional like an if statement, but it's more condensed in that it's only on one line, and we can use it in order to assign variables or give it in variables different information. We typically don't want to use these when we have a lot of code to do, but if you got something really short, this could be a very good option. So I'm going to create a new variable. I'm just going to call it my variable for now. Actually, let's make an if statement that this ternary operator is going to replace so that we can compare the two and see how it works. So I'm going to say if say a variable, my number equals 10. Again, I'm going to say if my number is greater than 0, I'm going to create a new variable called is positive. I'm going to say the number is, and we're just going to say, yeah, we'll just say positive, just to keep it short. Then I'm going to do an else and create the same variable is positive, and we're going to say not positive, just like that, and fix that spelling mistake there. So this is going to be the if statement that we're going to replace with a single line as a ternary operator. And you can see, we'll just do a console log down here, is positive, and it's going to print positive or not positive depending on whether this number is a positive number or not. Positive. If I do -10, not positive. Okay? So that's the behavior that we have. Now, let's replace this with the ternary operator. So all this code is going to be done in one line. To do that, we declare our new variable is positive, give it an equal sign, and now this is where the ternary operator comes in. We do what is the condition. So the condition was my number is greater than 0, followed by a question mark. Then we do what should be assigned if that was true. If that is true, we want to do positive, followed by a full colon, and what it is we want it to be if it is not true, which is not positive. Just like that. This does exactly the same thing as this. We create a variable, just like this. We use a condition right here, followed by a question mark. The first thing is what should that variable be if our condition is true, followed by a colon, and what should it be if it's false. Okay? So I'm going to delete this, and we're going to see it does in fact do exactly the same thing. So -10, not positive. Positive 10, positive. Okay? And this is called a ternary operator. All languages have it. Sometimes it's done a little bit of a different way, but it's basically just a really condensed if statement that also allows us to assign a variable different things depending on if a condition is true or false. We don't necessarily need to assign something here. We can use this to just run particular code like we've seen in other if statements. But usually it's done to assign a variable some sort of information based off of a condition. We don't want to do too many of these. At least try to keep them pretty short, because if you start making a lot of these, very big ones, it gets really messy and very hard to read what your code is doing. So, but they can be a very useful thing. Anyways, that's all I have for you today. Enjoy the next assignment, and I'll see you in the next video.